It's a funny thing about human perception. Think about the last time you looked out your living room window and just saw rain pouring down.
Okay.
Right. The sky is completely gray, water is pooling in the street, and your immediate, unquestioned assumption is simply, well, it is raining. It feels like this global, indisputable fact. You don't naturally think to yourself, it is raining exclusively on my specific front lawn.
No, you definitely don't. You just instinctively assume that the weather you're experiencing right at that exact moment, that's the weather everyone in your zip code or, maybe even your entire city is experiencing.
Yeah, exactly. But then you get in your car, you drive like 3 blocks down the road to the grocery store, and the pavement is completely bone dry.
Right. The sun is shining.
The sun is shining, the birds are singing, and suddenly your big universal fact just shrinks back down into a highly localized, hyper-specific little cloud that only existed directly over your own roof.
It's really a perfect, everyday illustration of a much deeper cognitive mechanism. We are constantly taking a very small, very local sample of reality, which is often just what our own bodies are telling us,
Right, yeah.
and projecting it outward as an absolute universal truth.
And that jump, from a local sensation to a global assumption, that is at the absolute core of our deep dive today. We are looking at this fascinating intersection of cognitive psychology and, of all things, residential air conditioning.
Yes, air conditioning.
Yeah.
It sounds niche, but it's brilliant.
It really is. So, our mission today is to figure out how to distinguish a local feeling from a global reality so we don't fall victim to our own misperceptions. We've got two main sources for this. First, a foundational 1980 paper from psychologist Anthony Greenwald, and we're pairing that with this incredibly profound reflection from Dave Hartzell.
Yeah, Dave's piece is fantastic.
So good. Dave is a master HVAC technician with nearly 50 years in the trade. He wrote a piece for the Human Diagnostic called "She Thought the Whole House Was Cold." And honestly, reading Dave's story completely changed how I view every argument I've ever had over the office thermostat.
It's a brilliant pairing, because Dave's physical service call makes the abstract psychology entirely visible. Abstract concepts about human bias can feel a little dry, but when you ground them in a literal, sweating, frustrated human being trying to figure out why their living room is freezing, the mechanics of how the mind processes reality just become unavoidable.
Absolutely. So let's jump straight into Dave's story because the setup is so vivid. We are in Okarche, Oklahoma. It's late September. Dave describes the day perfectly. It's warm, the wind is blowing out of the south, and he notes that the front porch of this particular house had that specific warm, dusty smell you only really get out west in early autumn.
That's a great detail.
Right. But he's standing on this porch because a customer called him with absolute urgent insistence that her entire house was freezing.
And this wasn't just a casual, hey, can you swing by sometime next week kind of call. She wanted a professional out there that exact same day.
Right. And here's where the diagnostic puzzle really begins.
Wow.
While Dave was still on the phone with her, taking down the information, he asked her where in the house she had measured the temperature.
The obvious first question.
The obvious question. And her response was that she hadn't actually measured it anywhere. She didn't look at a thermometer. She just, and this is a quote, knew.
That phrasing is crucial. She didn't suspect, she knew.
Exactly. So Dave drives out to Okarche. It's a warm September afternoon outside. But when she opens the front door, she greets him wearing a heavy cardigan sweater and thick wool socks.
Wow. So she is providing physical, undeniable evidence of her internal reality. To her body, it is winter.
Exactly. She points him straight toward the living room to fix the problem. So Dave goes to work. He's a professional, so he doesn't just guess. He starts measuring. He walks over to the thermostat on the hallway wall, and it reads a perfectly normal 73 degrees. Then he walks to the back of the house to check the ambient temperature in the other rooms. The bedrooms are sitting comfortably at 75 degrees. The kitchen is 74. The bonus room over the garage is 72.
So, objectively, empirically, the house itself is quite warm.
The house is completely fine. But then Dave goes back to the living room. He takes the thermometer and puts it directly on the supply register, the vent where the conditioned air is blowing out into the room, and it's blowing cold air at 68 degrees.
Well, that's what it's supposed to do.
Right. But then he looks at the exact spot where this customer spends the vast majority of her day. It's a recliner. And that recliner happens to be located directly underneath a cold air return vent.
Ah, the plot thickens.
It does. The temperature at the seat of that specific recliner is exactly 70 degrees, with a constant draft of moving air pulling right over it. Her body was cold, Therefore, she concluded the entire house was cold.
The local report becomes the global truth.
Yeah, and reading this, I kept thinking that it's like assuming the entire global internet is down. Just because your specific phone has a spotty Wi-Fi connection in one tiny isolated corner of your kitchen.
That's exactly what it is. You experience a drop in the signal, and instead of blaming the physical walls immediately around you, your brain jumps to the conclusion of a catastrophic system failure everywhere.
But, okay, I have to push back a little bit on this woman's logic, just on behalf of basic common sense. I mean, we're talking about a house, not some sprawling corporate campus. Isn't it a bit absurd that she didn't just stand up from her recliner, walk 10 feet into her own kitchen, and physically feel the 74-degree air before calling a professional repairman? It just seems like she's being, I don't know, aggressively unobservant.
It does seem that way from the outside, and, well, it's really easy to judge her for it. But when you look at the cognitive science, this isn't stupidity or laziness at all. It is actually a highly evolved efficiency mechanism. The reason she didn't walk into the kitchen is that her brain had already solved the problem using the data closest to it.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, and this brings us directly to Anthony Greenwald's 1980 paper on what he called the totalitarian ego.
Okay, let's unpack this, because totalitarian is a really strong word. When I hear that, I think of a dictator actively and maliciously suppressing dissenting information, rewriting history books, throwing political opponents in jail. That implies a level of active malice. Is my brain really operating like a dictator just because I'm chilly in my favorite chair?
Well, it's not about malice, it's about narrative control. In a political sense, a totalitarian regime does not allow for competing truths. There's only one canonical version of reality, and the regime dictates what it is.
Right.
Greenwald argued that the human ego, our sense of self and our internal perspective, operates the exact same way when it processes sensory input. The mind treats its own local perspective as the absolute, undisputed truth. It doesn't naturally pause to consult other points of view, and it certainly doesn't assume its own sensory data is flawed.
So it's just the absolute ruler of its own physical universe. It feels cold skin and it issues an executive decree. The world is cold.
Precisely. It decides what reality is based solely on local sensation. Once it makes that ruling, it doesn't just ignore other data. It actively assimilates or dismisses anything that contradicts the ruling. And you asked earlier why this happens. Why wouldn't she just walk to the kitchen? It comes down to metabolic efficiency.
You mean literal calorie burning?
Yes, literal calories. The human brain is incredibly computationally expensive. It makes up only about 2% of our body weight, but it uses roughly 20% of our resting energy.
Wow, 20%. That's huge.
It is. So if your brain had to constantly run a parallel poll of every single room, cross-referencing every assumption every single time you wanted to know if you were physically comfortable, it would drain your energy reserves rapidly. To survive, the brain takes shortcuts.
So it just uses whatever is closest.
Right. It uses the body it has,
Yeah.
the seat it is in, the air it is breathing, and it extrapolates. It uses the local report as a proxy for the entire environment.
That makes a lot of sense, actually. She's not ignoring the kitchen out of spite. Her brain is just saying, look, we're freezing right here. We have all the data we need to declare a global cold emergency. Do not waste precious calories pacing around the house to confirm what we already know.
Exactly. And this isn't just some quirky theory. It is backed by decades of robust psychological research.
Yeah.
Consider the famous 1979 study by Ross and Sickley on egocentric attribution. They wanted to see how people estimate their own contributions to joint tasks, like, say, a married couple doing household chores.
Oh boy, this is dangerous territory.
Very dangerous. They interviewed 37 married couples and asked them to independently estimate what percentage of the household chores they personally completed. Washing dishes, taking out the trash, child rearing. If human perception were objective, a couple's combined estimates should add up to exactly 100%.
Let me guess. It did not add up to 100%.
Not even close. Consistently, the couple's estimates added up to significantly more than 100%. Right. Both spouses genuinely believed they were doing the vast majority of the work. And Ross and Sickley found this wasn't because people were intentionally lying to look good. It comes down to cognitive availability and somatic markers.
Somatic markers, meaning like how it literally feels in the body.
Exactly. When you scrub a stubborn pan in the sink, your brain encodes the physical effort, the fatigue in your shoulders, the smell of the soap, the time it took. That memory is highly available to you. But when your partner vacuums the stairs while you were in another room reading a book, You don't feel their muscle fatigue.
Because you're just sitting there.
Right, you don't have access to their internal dashboard. Because your own effort is so vividly available to your brain, your local effort becomes the global metric for how much work is being done in the house overall.
That is fascinating. So it's the exact same mechanism as the recliner. I feel my own cold air. I don't feel the warm air in the bonus room. So the cold air is the only reality that mathematically counts.
Precisely. And later, around 2004, Epley and his colleagues expanded on this by looking at the actual mechanics of perspective taking. They found that humans use an anchoring and adjustment process. When we try to understand someone else's perspective or the broader reality of the situation, we always drop an anchor at our own internal state first.
So I'm cold, therefore that is the baseline anchor for reality.
Right. From that egocentric anchor, we try to adjust outward to accommodate other realities. But adjusting takes cognitive effort. It requires activating the prefrontal cortex, which is tiring, like flexing a muscle. So what do? We stop adjusting as soon as we find a plausible excuse to stop.
We just give up.
Yeah, we consistently underadjust. And here's the terrifying part. When our extrapolation is wrong, that wrongness is completely invisible to us. To the woman in Okarche, her house wasn't just seemingly cold, it was cold. That was her absolute, undeniable reality.
And that invisible wrongness is exactly what Dave Hartzell writes about in his reflection. He points out that this bias runs through literally everything in his business, way beyond just the temperature of a room.
Well, absolutely.
He notes that a customer who is feeling financially anxious will automatically assume their whole family is anxious. A customer who looks at an invoice and thinks the quote is perfectly fair assumes their neighbor would also look at the quote and think it's fair. We are just walking around constantly copy-pasting our internal emotional and physical states onto everyone else.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, you can see how this physical battlefield in an Oklahoma living room perfectly maps onto almost every major human conflict. Think about management, parenting, or even deeply polarized politics. Friction happens anytime a person reports honestly from inside their own body or their own mind, but forgets they're just one of many bodies in the room.
Dave specifically brings up the classic thermostat disagreement as the ultimate battlefield for this. And anyone who has ever shared an apartment or an office knows exactly what he's talking about.
Oh, it is the quintessential spousal conflict.
Wow.
One partner is hot, the other partner is cold. They are standing in the exact same hallway, looking at a thermostat that is set to 72 degrees.
And they are both entirely convinced that 72 degrees is objectively, morally wrong. One thinks it's a sauna, the other thinks it's an icebox.
Yes, because each person's body is acting as the totalitarian ruler of what 72 degrees should feel like. The crucial point here, and this is what makes conflicts so hard to resolve, is that neither person is lying.
Right.
Neither one's being malicious or trying to gaslight the other. They're both reporting highly accurate, flawless data from inside their own local environment, but they are generalizing it to the whole room.
And as Dave says, the room cannot accommodate two contradictory generalizations at once. The room just is what it is. The laws of thermodynamics don't care about your somatic markers.
Which is why Dave offers this incredible piece of HVAC wisdom that honestly belongs in a marriage counseling textbook. He tells couples, the thermostat is for the house, not for the body. The body is for closing.
I absolutely love that line. The body is for clothing. It's such a clean delineation of responsibility. Wow. You manage your local environment, your own body, with a sweater, or by taking off a layer, and you let the house manage the global environment.
Exactly.
But it really makes you think about how often we try to force the metaphorical thermostat of our entire society or our workplace to cater to our specific internal temperature rather than just putting on a sweater.
It's a very neutral, physical way to understand massive social disagreements. Two people can look at the exact same economic data or the exact same social policy. Because of their backgrounds, one feels incredibly secure while the other feels deeply threatened. Both are accurately reporting their local lived experience.
Right.
But when they extrapolate that local experience into a demand for a global thermostat change, they clash. Not because one is inherently right and the other is evil, but because the totalitarian ego demands that its local reality be recognized as the universal standard.
So what does this all mean? Like, how do we actually deal with this in practice? Because I'm trying to put myself in Dave's boots, standing in that living room in Okarche. He knows the house is 75 degrees. He knows she's sitting in a 70-degree pocket of moving air.
Yeah.
But he can't just look at this woman who is shivering in wool socks and say, you know, you're crazy, the house is fine, take off your sweater. That would be incredibly insulting, and it wouldn't solve the problem.
And Dave notes that confronting it directly like that absolutely does not work. If you dismiss a person's local report or argue with their bodily experience, their ego just digs in deeper. If you tell them the house is fine when their body is literally shivering, they don't suddenly realize they are wrong. They just conclude that you are incompetent.
Right, because you were attacking their reality. You were telling the dictator that their laws are fake. So how does Dave de-escalate it?
He uses a very specific diagnostic method. Instead of challenging her reality, he maps it. He asks 3 specific questions to gently introduce external data.
Okay, what are they?
First, where exactly are you sitting when you feel this? Second, when was the last time you walked through every single room and checked the temperature? And third, is the temperature in this specific room what you would expect it to be, given where the vents are?
Oh, I see. He makes the problem hyperlocal. He shrinks the generalization back down to the chair.
What's fascinating here is the psychological brilliance of this approach. It's all in how it makes the customer feel. He doesn't make her feel foolish for being wrong about the house. He makes her feel investigated. He validates her sensory input by treating it as a vital clue to a mystery rather than a hallucination.
So he literally walks room by room with her. He holds the thermometer up and lets her see the objective data with her own eyes. They check the kitchen, the bedroom, the living room.
Right. He provides the outside data that the totalitarian ego usually blocks out, but he does it as a partner, not an adversary. And there is a quote from Dave in his reflection that I think is just profoundly empathetic. He tells his frustrated customers, "Sometimes the body is right about the body and wrong about the building, and that is okay. That is just how human senses work."
Man, that is such a graceful way to handle human error. It gives people permission to be wrong without feeling broken. It essentially says, you're not crazy for feeling freezing cold, your sensors are working perfectly, you're just wrong about the building. It cleanly separates the local truth from the global truth.
It is the ultimate de-escalation tool. You validate the local truth. Yes, you are cold, while gently introducing the global reality.
Now, it would be really easy for us to sit here, armed with our cognitive psychology papers, and just analyze the customer's flaws. We can kind of chuckle at the lady in the wool socks who didn't check her own kitchen. But Dave adds this brilliant, self-implicating twist to his story that proves he is just as vulnerable to this. He admits that he, the 47-year veteran expert, is not immune to the totalitarian ego.
No one is immune. It is human hardware.
Yeah. Dave confesses that if he is out on a job site and he's been climbing up and down an extension ladder in the sun for 10 minutes, his physical state completely changes. His heart rate goes up to 120 beats a minute. He's sweating, he's breathing hard, his adrenaline is pumping. And he says that in that altered physical state, if he puts his hand over a vent, he might falsely feel that the system's static pressure is way too high or that the airflow is incredibly weak.
Wait, let's clarify that for a second. When he says static pressure, what exactly is he measuring?
Basically, static pressure is like blood pressure for your house's ductwork. It's the resistance to airflow in the system. If the static pressure is too high, it's like a clogged artery. The blower motor has to work incredibly hard and might burn out. If it's too low, the air doesn't have the force to reach the furthest rooms in the house. It's a critical measurement.
Okay. And his point is that his own internal gauge, his elevated heart rate and his sweating skin, distorts his perception of that external pressure.
Exactly. Because his heart is pounding, the air blowing out of the vent feels weak by comparison. His local physical state rewrites his professional judgment. He says if he lets his body override the situation, he will completely misdiagnose the mechanical system. He might recommend replacing a motor that is actually working perfectly.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So what does he do? He forces himself to rely strictly on his diagnostic tools. He pulls out a manometer. He uses pressure gauges. He uses supply temperature probes.
Because a manometer didn't just climb a ladder. A thermometer doesn't have an elevated heart rate.
Right. Tools don't have an egocentric bias.
Yeah.
They don't have a totalitarian ego trying to save calories. A manometer just reads the pressure in the duct, completely indifferent to how tired the technician holding it happens to be.
The tools act as objective arbiters of reality. They break through the totalitarian ego of the expert technician just as effectively as the room-to-room walk breaks through the ego of the customer.
Dave literally writes, "If I let my body override my tools, I am no better than the customer's body overriding the house." That level of humility from someone who's been doing this for nearly half a century is just incredible to me.
It's the mark of a true master of a craft. Recognizing that your expertise doesn't erase your human biology. It just means you know exactly when you need to mistrust your own biology.
Here's where it gets really interesting. We have to talk about the grand resolution of the Okarche recliner mystery. After mapping the house, checking the rooms, and verifying the data, Dave didn't have to tear out the ductwork. He didn't have to replace the condenser, and he didn't have to rewire the thermostat. The fix for this massive whole house emergency was shockingly simple.
The customer just had to move, didn't she?
She stood up and she moved her recliner exactly 3 feet to the east. That was the entire repair.
3 feet.
3 feet. By moving it, she got her body out of the localized low-pressure zone that was being caused by the return vent sucking air past her chair. She sat back down in the new spot, and instantly she wasn't cold anymore. Dave points out that this whole crisis was caused by a duct geometry decision made by a home builder decades prior, who obviously had no idea where this specific woman was eventually going to place her favorite chair.
So simply by moving 3 feet, the local environment of the body and the global environment of the house finally got onto the same map.
Yes. And Dave is such a class act, he didn't even charge her a diagnostic fee for the visit. He considered the visit itself and the conversation they had to be the diagnostic. She even tried to tip him for his time, and he refused it. He just told her to call him back if the rest of the house ever started reporting what the recliner had been reporting.
This raises an important question. I think this story, combined with the cognitive science behind it, forces us to look at the manometers in our own lives. What are the tools we are using to constantly check our internal gauges against objective reality?
That's a great way to look at it.
Right. We live in an era of unprecedented information overload. It has never been easier to just surround ourselves with data that perfectly confirms whatever local bias our totalitarian ego has already decided is true. Active critical thinking is our manometer. Seeking out dissenting data, deliberately walking room by room through a complex problem from different perspectives, that is the cognitive equivalent of checking the kitchen before you declare the whole house freezing.
That is such a tangible way to apply this. The next time you find yourself deeply frustrated with a situation, or locked in a bitter argument with a colleague, or absolutely convinced that the whole house is cold, take a pause, take a breath, and ask yourself, am I reacting to the entire house right now, or am I just reacting to the fact that my specific chair is in a draft?
It's about maintaining the discipline to recognize the difference between the weather in your entire zip code and the weather immediately outside your specific window.
Exactly. Just because it is raining on your front lawn doesn't mean the whole world is underwater.
And I want to leave you with one final, lingering thought to mull over as you go about your day. We spent this entire time exploring how seamlessly and how invisibly our own physical senses can deceive us into believing that a highly localized personal discomfort is a universal truth.
Yeah.
So ask yourself, what deeply held moral, social, or philosophical truths are you clinging to right now that might actually just be the psychological equivalent of sitting right underneath a cold air return vent?
Ooh. Now that is something to think about. Until next time, keep checking those internal gauges.